Hi friends and neighbors, let's talk about sex. I've been going over kind of the history of Buddhist rules surrounding sex when monks are involved, monks and nuns, but I use the word monks to mean male and female, and maybe we'll get into a little bit of that, I don't know. But it's kind of a fascinating subject. It's pretty apparent that early on in Buddhist history, the Buddha and his monks realized that sex was one of the areas where people could get into trouble. So in the early days of Buddhism, there were no rules. That is to say, when Buddha first started out, he didn't set up a system of rules and then say, okay, we got the system of rules, let's get everybody together and we're going to follow these rules. It went a different direction, which is they first got everybody together, and when problems started happening among their sangha, then they made rules about it. So it became clear that sex was going to be one of the problematic areas. And what you see in a lot of Indian philosophy is people get very legalistic and they like to try to shore up things into sets of rules that will cover every possible situation. So it gets really weird in the Vinaya. The Vinaya is the monastic code for Buddhists when it comes to pretty much everything in the Vinaya if you really want to sit and read it. But when it comes to sex, it gets especially kind of freaky. Years ago, when the Bodhi Tree bookstore was still around in Los Angeles, I bought this set, which contains, I believe, all or almost all of the Vinaya rules. So you can see how big and heavy this set is. So I'm going to read you a couple of the things, or a few of the things about sex that come from this. There's a word here that they use all the time, samgadisesa. I think that's how you pronounce it. And even when I looked this up, it's really hard to understand. My understanding of samgadisesa is it means a rule that requires the sangha to meet and discuss the person who broke the rule. I think that's what it means. If somebody wants to correct me in the comments, I'll take that correction. But anyway, here's what it says. These are just a couple. The emission of semen by design except by a person sleeping is a samgadisesa. So no masturbation, and we'll get into that too. Whatsoever bhikshu, that's a monk, being degraded shall with perverted mind come into bodily contact with a woman by taking hold of her hand or by taking hold of her hair or by touching any part of her body, that is a samgadisesa. So these rules are always formulated in the male version. There were a female version of the same rules, so what usually gets preserved is the male version. Apologies to anybody who's offended by that, but you can kind of figure it out for yourself what the opposite version of this would be, or what the homosexual version of this would be, etc. Whatsoever bhikkhu being degraded shall with perverted mind address a woman with wicked words, exciting to passion as those of a young man to a maid, that is a samgadisesa. So you can't be on Tinder or Grindr or any of those things. Whatsoever bhikkhu being degraded shall with perverted mind magnify in the hearing of a woman ministration to himself by saying, this, sister, would be the noblest of ministrations, that to so righteous and exalted a religious person as myself you should ministrate by that act, meaning sexual intercourse. So like telling a lady that she's going to get some kind of karmic merit by having sex with you as a monk, that's a violation of the rules. And believe it or not, this still goes on, and there's the source of scandals today when people do this. Whatsoever bhikshu shall take a seat with a woman, one man with one woman, in secret, on a secluded seat suitable for sexual intercourse, and if a believing woman, trustworthy of speech, who has seen them so, shall lay it to his charge under one of the three rules, either under the Paragika or under the Samgadisesa or under the Patikita rules, let that bhikshu, if he acknowledges he has so sat, be dealt with according to the circumstances reported, etc., etc. And it goes on and on and on. When it comes to rules for masturbation, you'll notice the first rule sort of implied masturbation. It gets really weird. Apparently, it wasn't good enough to just leave it at don't intentionally emit semen. In later developments, it went to they had to define what intentionally emitting semen meant, and it gets crazy. This is there are rules against a bhikkhu who, the bhikkhu is a monk, who squeezes his penis with his fist, one who rubs his penis with his thumb, one who rubs his penis against his bed, one who inserts his penis into sand, there's one I never would have thought of, one who bathes against the current in a stream, that might work. I guess that's like the ancient equivalent of a shower head, right? One who rubs his preceptor's back in the bathing room, one who gets an erection from the friction of his thighs and robes while walking, one who has his belly heated in the bathing room, I'm not sure I get that one, one who stretches his body, not sure how that works. So you can kind of see what's going on here. It's they go, well, is it, these monks are going, well, masturbation, that's when you do it with your hand, right? Well, what if I do it on the bed? No, that's still masturbation. Well, what if I do it on a post? Oh, it's still masturbation. What if I stick it in the sand? That's still masturbation. It just goes on and on and on and on. And the moral of the story, at least as I take it, is once you start making these rules and people start asking about, well, what about this? What about that? What about this? It just gets endless. So after a few hundred years of this sort of thing happening, in China, they developed a version of the precepts which was squeezed down to 16 instead of 200 and some. And these are called the Bodhisattva Precepts. And I'm really glossing over a lot because I just read a bunch of stuff on this, so I'm giving you the Cliff Notes version of this. If somebody who's very pedantic wants to quibble with it, we can spar if you want, but know that I'm giving you the Cliff Notes, right? So they squeezed the rules about sex down to one rule about sex, which I'm showing you right now. A Japanese person would pronounce this Fu Tan In Kai. Fu Tan In Kai. That's syllable by syllable. So through these, fu is don't, basically. The second one, in, is covet or indulge in. That's the short version. The third one, in, which is that one there, is lewdness or licentiousness, and it's the first character in the word for prostitute, a lewd woman. So that's that one. And the last one, kai, just means precept. So the first and the last one are kind of almost throwaways because it's not, and then that last one is precept. So covetousness and lewdness. Now there are many ways to translate this. This is something that I found at the Austin Zen Center in Texas, and they let me copy it and take a copy home. It is Evolution of the Precepts study material for the 2008 National Conference of the Soto Zen Buddhist Association. I've mentioned this before. It's like one of the few things the Soto Zen Buddhist Association ever did that was worthwhile, was make this kind of stuff. I don't know if they still do this. I think now they just talk about how politically correct they are. They just get in meetings and discuss how wonderful they are. But back in 2008, they were doing things like trying to figure out what the history of the precepts were, which is a really valuable thing. So here are some different translations or different reimaginings in some cases of that precept, that third grave precept. This is precept number 3 in the 10 grave precepts, and you don't need to know all that, but that's what it is. The Shasta Abbey just calls it the third grave precept on coveting, so very general. Nishijima Roshi, in his book on the precepts, was not to lust. That's how he translated it. Then we get some really long ones. Treating all beings with respect and dignity, I vow to take up the way of not misusing sex. Boundless Way Zen. I've heard the name. I'm not sure where they're located. But not misusing sex is kind of a common way of expressing this. Although, as you can see from the Chinese characters I just showed you, that's not quite what it means, but I think it's fair to say that's the general understanding, is don't misuse sex. Let's look at a few of these other ones. No misuse of sex. Abstinence from misuse of sexuality. And one I like a lot, this is Kobanchino Roshi's version. He's my first teacher's teacher. No attachment to fulfillment. So he leaves sex out of the equation altogether and talks about no attachment to fulfillment, making it much more general. So it's not just sex you're worried about, it's this whole idea that you can be attached to fulfillment, of some desire in the future. Do not be greedy. Maizumi Roshi turned it into that, which is interesting. And then we have these really crazy long ones. This is credited to somebody or some entity named Risetto. So I don't know who did this, but this is my favorite of the really, really long ones. I take up the way of engaging in sexual intimacy respectfully with an open heart. I take up the way of stepping into sexual intimacy not only naked in body but in heart, and I take up the way of meeting the craving as well as the fear of the craving, the desire for closeness as well as the fear of closeness, the greed for power as well as the fear of power, the escape as well as the union. So they've expanded those 4 characters into a really strange thing. And I don't know this particular person, but I've seen this a lot where people kind of present this as if this is the ancient wisdom of the ages that they've pulled out of, some, old translation, but really it's just a thing they made up. So this is kind of what happens over and over and over again. And in a lot of Buddhist history, you see this. You see these things go in kind of cycles again and again. So it starts off with a general idea of, look, be careful about sex because it's a big problem. And everybody goes, well, what do you mean? And then they go, well, blah, 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 and this and this, and then they come out with a 1,000 rules and expand it. And then somebody says, oh my God, look at these thousands of rules. Let's just shrink it back again. And then it stays that way for a while. And then, like a zip file, somebody says, well, what does this don't misuse sex mean? And they go, wah. So if you look at like the San Francisco Zen Center or various other centers in the country, they will have their version of a kind of legalistic precept about sex, often because they're worried about lawsuits and such like, and they want to have some kind of rules on the books and that covers this. And they make these long things that try to cover every possible interaction that could happen, and arranging people into this person has this much seniority, and that means they have power over this person, so these two can't have sex. You can't have sex unless you've been there for 6 months, which is probably a good idea, but they have these kind of rules and things, and they just expand it out again. And then later on, probably one of these days, somebody will go, okay, let's just shrink that back again, and it'll become shrunk and expanded and shrunk and expanded, and that's how it goes. But as Dogen said, and as I expressed in one of my recent books, don't be a jerk. Shoaku makusa, don't do wrong. It's really basic, and the idea is that in any given situation when you are doing something wrong. That's hard for us to accept. Nishijima Roshi used to say that all the time, and I'd be going, well, I don't know if I'm doing wrong. But the idea is that there is a place that you can find if you do Zazen and you watch yourself very carefully, where that becomes abundantly apparent and you can walk into a situation and go, oh, no, I better not do that. And we're trying to point at that rather than spelling out a long list of legal mumbo-jumbo that tries to cover every possible human interaction with a legalistic rule and a kind of punishment or form of restitution or what have you that goes along with that. So there you go. I'm trying to keep these short because there could be a lot more said on the subject. If you want to talk more about the subject, you can write me and there'll be an address below. I'm really, really backed up on emails lately. So some of you sent me emails like a month ago, still haven't gotten replies, and I apologize. I'm trying to finish a book. I'm trying to do my taxes, which takes like 2 weeks for me to get it all together. So I'm not getting to your emails as fast as I used to. Sorry about that. But if you want to contribute to things that will be taxed on me next year, there's PayPal and Patreon links below. Again, as I'm doing my taxes, I am seeing that the money I'm receiving from your PayPal donations and your Patreon donations are really the majority of my income, and I thank you so much for letting me have a one-bedroom apartment in Silver Lake in LA. That's really nice of you. Thanks. We'll see you later. Don't be a jerk about sex.